This is a panel discussion with community members and members of FAWCO on anti-racist work in personal and organizational development. Here's the first question. So why have we gathered? We see what is happening in the United States. There are a number of things amiss during this time of crisis that need to be addressed and must be handled simultaneously. The death of George Floyd has opened the floodgates for a national, if not global, dialogue on race and social justice, inclusive practice, and the quality of our respective personal and organizational engagement with the Black community. There is a need to understand and appreciate the challenges faced by Black women, to enrich our outreach programming and facilitate an increase in membership and participation of Black women at all tiers of FAWCO and in our respective AWC club organizations. To expressly include in the scope of our advocacy work, focus on anti-bias and anti-racist awareness and supporting equal rights and access to different tiers of society on behalf of Black people globally and Black women specifically. We need to increase our competence in cross-cultural communication and education and deepen our awareness of what is going on around us, what we see and what we don't see. And simultaneous to all of that, we have an impending federal election in which domestically based and overseas Americans need to be and remain engaged. We are outraged. We are anxious. We are concerned. Who are we? We're sophisticated women, educated women, women of the world, old enough to distinguish between right and wrong, educated enough to appreciate the differences of diversity, sophisticated enough to collectively create avenues of response to the world's outcry for improved engagement and treatment of Black identified persons. So I ask again, why are we here? The global cry to pay attention is being heard. We come together to listen, to discuss, and begin the work of thinking differently about Black women's experience, systems of inclusion and exclusion, as well as practices that serve as barriers to engagement of Black women within FAWCO and again within our AWC organizations. We are reading, we are talking, we are paying attention, and are preparing to stand at the ready to take action to support our Black sisters and look to ways to incorporate their issues and sustained involvement in our work. We begin with a panel of women representing diversity of age, profession, and experience, each with a perspective to share on current issues of historic relevance, inclusion practice, and the inward organizational reflection as a means to chart a new course to inculcate diversity and inclusion practice at various tiers in our personal and organizational development. I begin by introducing the panel. Muriel Tillinghast. Muriel Tillinghast is our keynote speaker today, and she's a lifelong community-based human rights activist. She was born in Washington, D.C., and served as one of the presidents of the Nonviolent Action Group, NAG. She also participated in desegregation efforts in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Delaware. A member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Muriel headed 3 projects in 3 counties in the infamous state of Mississippi in the summer of 1964, and headed statewide operations. She worked collaboratively with the SNCC New York office and its Atlanta office, where SNCC was headquartered until 1969. I'll leave it there for the moment. We'll come back around to Muriel. And Emily, would you please take it away and introduce yourself?
I will. Thank you so much, Bayo. And thank you, Muriel and Kanika, for joining us today and for being so willing to host this panel discussion. I'm Emily von Eerten. I'm the president of FAWCO. I've been asked to tell a little bit about myself. I am from Oklahoma. I went to public schools there. Then I was a National Merit Scholar at Rice University. And I came back to Tulsa to get my law degree, and I practiced law there as a civil litigation and insurance defense lawyer. With FAWCO, I got involved in 1999. I was involved with the website. I became vice president. I was president in 2005 to 2007. I've held many other positions within FAWCO, and I was asked to return as president last year, somewhat on short notice, as the candidate at the time had to pull back for health reasons. So this is my second stint with FAWCO, and I'm very happy to be leading the organization, although we face some complications with COVID and now with the rising protests in the United States and globally. So we would like to address this issue head on. If not now, then when? Thank you, Bayo.
Thank you, Emily. Kanika, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure can. Thank you so much for your introduction, Emily, and I'm honored to be in a historical moment, which is exactly what this is. Everyone, my name is Kanika Holloway, if you don't know me, and I'm a former president of AWC Antwerp, and now presently Club President's Liaison for FAWCO, where I facilitate communication and provide advice and support to the amazing club presidents of FAWCO. I am the founder of CAKE, a business improvement process for nonprofits and cultural organizations. And CAKE was born and created based on my practice as a serial entrepreneur who has survived 2 economic crises in the US and combined that experience with senior management successes in corporate America, serving on the boards of nonprofits, and finally by working closely with managing and strategy directors of several luxury houses in France and Italy. Now, what leads me to my relevance and experience to contribute to the discussion is one of my clients. I'm actively a senior advisor to the UHousing Initiative in the United States. The UHousing Initiative is an effort to close the gap of intergenerational wealth for African Americans, other minorities, and millennials. The UHousing Initiative is sponsored by the Chinoa Fund, a leading national provider of down payment assistance to qualified home buyers, and is led by African American faith-based and civil rights leaders who are Bishop Harry Jackson and Dr. Alveda King, who is the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King, and both are spiritual advisors to Donald Trump, the president. Recently, I was invited by NATO to receive a diploma at the International Institute of Humanitarian Law in San Remo, Italy. And I was educated among NATO generals and colonels representing 30 countries. Among them were only 3 women of African descent, which are myself, an African woman colonel from Namibia, and an African American woman who is an international criminal attorney. The focus of this program was on enhancing diversity skills in international operations and conduct, in which women are critical in the peace process in times of war. And the fact that there were only 3 African American women even invited to this was astonishing. So this was an education integrating gender perspective, a project and framework, and in accordance with UNSCR 1325 on women, peace, and security. So thank you. Turn it back to you, Bayo.
Oh, thank you so much. Wow. I'm going to just take a moment to just introduce myself. My name is Bayo Callender, and I'm an international human rights attorney. I'm also a mediator and an arbitrator with a broad background that includes policy development, inclusion advocacy, governance, human resources management, technical writing, leadership coaching, and compliance. I have more than 20 years of work experience and have been engaged in leading, organizing, developing, and facilitating programs and policies and just general discussions related to improved engagement among diverse cultures. I'm a native New Yorker, but now I live in Stockholm, Sweden. And prior to moving to Sweden, I worked in The Hague, Netherlands, and served in several different capacities with the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. These capacities included being as a legal project manager, a legal officer, a staff union legal representative, and a gender and inclusion specialist. I also was a law clerk at the Michigan Supreme Court, where I served on the court's legislative drafting team that created the official draft of the Michigan Indian Family Preservation Act. It's a model new law that expanded the protections of Native American children in their respective sovereign tribal nations in child welfare court proceedings. I am not only the current president of the American Women's Club in Stockholm, I'm also an educator and consultant, and I facilitate dialogue, support coaching, policy development, and programming around issues of racism, identity, and social integration. I would like to get back to our keynote speaker, Muriel Tillinghast, because one of the things that is particularly helpful, to note is that Muriel has worked alongside a number of venerated Black human and civil rights women activists, women such as Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, Cynthia Washington, along with white female allies that include Anne Braden, Dottie Zellner, and Virginia Durr. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of these women, but I thought I would just take a moment to give a quick introduction because these are people that you should know. And our first slide, as you can see, is of Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. Ms. Hamer, bear with me. Ms. Hamer actually was born one of 20 children. And excuse me, one moment, I have to get to my reference point here. She was one of 20 children from a sharecropper family in Montgomery County, Mississippi. And she left really school at age 12 to go work and pick cotton in the plantation, where she worked until she was 45 years old. She was a passionate and powerful voice advocating for social and economic change in the civil rights movement. And this movement encompassed voting rights. She was an organizer in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, and she led volunteers in registering to vote. Ms. Hamer also during 1964 brought hundreds of college students, helped organize this effort that brought hundreds of college students, Black and white, to answer the call to assist with getting Black Americans registered to vote in the segregated South. She also co-founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, where she called for mandatory integrated state delegations and for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to be recognized as the official delegation of the Democratic National Convention. There's a story there, but I'll leave it. We'll go to her slide because she's known, this is one of many very famous quotes from Mrs. Hamer. Sometimes it seems like to tell the truth today is to run the risk of being killed. But if I fall, I will fall 5 feet 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom. I am not backing off. Ms. Ella Baker. Ms. Baker is a civil rights icon and really represents intergenerational engagement and support in the effort to advance the issues of Black Americans in the segregated South and segregated United States. She was a beloved and respected mentor that was committed to listening and providing guidance to the raw and spirited energy of students who were coming to make a change. Born in 1903 in Norfolk, Virginia, raised in North Carolina, her grandmother was a slave who was actually whipped for refusing to marry a man that was chosen for her by her slave owner. She was inspired by her grandmother's resilience and had such pride in the face of racism and injustice. She also worked with SNCC and the NAACP and worked with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which you may know because often people refer to Dr. Martin Luther King in this reference, because that was the group that he led. It was a faith-based cluster. But Mrs. Baker turned her attention towards student activists because she saw them as an important resource to the movement and saw how she had a fundamental role in forming SNCC because she was revered as a mentor. She also was a strategist and she provided just key support. One of a really wonderful quote that I pulled from her is that she says, "I have always thought what is needed is the development of people who are interested in not being leaders as much as developing leadership in others." She was given the nickname Fundi, which is in Swahili, it means a person who teaches a craft to the next generation. There's a film about her life by the same title. I encourage you to look for it. We move on to Ruby Doris Smith Robinson. A simple quote from a really no-nonsense person. If you think free, you are free. Born in April of 1942, Ruby Doris Smith Robinson was the central nervous system of SNCC and the SNCC executive, and served as the SNCC executive secretary. She managed the day-to-day details around logistics, around the motor fleet, because cars were very important to be able to move around and to move around with independence and safety, to flee danger. And she also served as a support for various SNCC initiatives, and she really ran that office. Her no-nonsense approach kept the operation humming, and beloved and respected, she took no mess from anyone. She was a part of the Freedom Riders who rode from Nashville, Tennessee to Montgomery, Alabama as a form of protest, where activists from various hues would ride buses interstate to challenge the conscious practice of non-enforcement by states of the US Supreme Court in decisions that ruled that segregation on public buses were unconstitutional. She was violently beaten in Montgomery, Alabama, and subsequently arrested and spent 45 days in the notorious Parchment State Prison, the oldest maximum security prison for men in the state of Mississippi, known for its horrific conditions and slave labor camp. She endured brutalization by prison guards. A firebrand by reputation, her name and legacy is permanently burned in the memories of all who were fortunate to meet her. And her fire really died too young. Ruby Doris died at the tender age of 25. We move on. Anne Braden. Anne Braden was born in Louisville, Kentucky. And as a Southern white woman, she really reflected on a number of things. A key quote from her is that she says, "It may seem paradoxical, but in this racist society, we who are white will overcome our oppression as women only when we reject once and for all the privileges conferred on us by our white skin. For the privileges are not real. They are a device through which we are kept under control." Anne Braden believed in freedom of thought, expression, and association, and saw this as a SNCC movement as an integral part of the broader struggle for social change. She and her husband, Carl Braden, worked with Ella Baker and were both deeply involved in the civil rights movement. And this was at a time when it was really unpopular among Southern whites to be so engaged. She was brave, she was challenging and unbending in the pursuit for racial equality at all facets of American life and served to inspire change. She was charged, actually both she and Carl were charged with sedition as a result of helping a Black American family purchase a home in a suburban neighborhood in a segregated housing section. It seemed to be in violation of the segregation housing practice that was in play at the time. And they paid a really large price for that. Even though they were ostracized, they committed themselves to the Black struggle for civil rights. And she wrote a book to unpack the psychology of white Southern racism from within, and was noted by Eleanor Roosevelt and Martin Luther King in the book, The Wall Between. We move on. Virginia Durr. Virginia Durr actually descended from a very wealthy Southern family that immigrated to Alabama in the early 1800s. And she learned about the life of antebellum South through her grandmother. It was at the death of her grandmother that her parents were able to advance even further into Birmingham society. And through a number of life experiences, she tussled with issues around racism, classism, Southern female gender identity, especially for elite women. While her grandmother practiced noblesse oblige in giving gifts and parties to the poor whites and Black families in her community, Virginia Durr served as a civil rights activist and lobbyist who saw herself as a dissenter in a hostile environment. And it was through leveraging her privilege and access as a woman of a certain social status that she was able to contribute to transforming her society. She's an associate of Ella Baker, Rosa Parks, Mary McLeod Bethune, and Eleanor Roosevelt. And she's also the sister-in-law of the Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, who actually started out as a Ku Klux Klansman and ultimately decided favorably in several key civil rights cases, including Shelley v. Kramer, which sought to invalidate judicial enforcement of racially restrictive covenants, Brown v. Board of Education, striking down racial segregation in public schools, and Alexander v. Holmes, which called for the immediate desegregation of public schools, 15 years after Brown versus Board of Ed. She was among the very few Southern whites who actively supported the civil rights movement, from the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 through to the late 60s, and devoted her life to the fight for social justice at a time when challenging racial and social norms entailed harassment and ostracism. A quote from her is, and referring to the myth making that that a lot of people characterize the South, she said, "I think the rest of the country is really taken in by the myth of the Old South and the beautiful women and the white pillared mansions and faithful Negro slave. The whole Civil War centennial is taken so seriously, and people seem to love the Civil War books and so on. It's having a bad effect on the thinking of the country and this romantic dream of the South." She goes further to say, "Until people in the rest of the country realize that the Southern situation is a part of the overall rottenness that infects this country, and stop thinking of us as different and does something toward making the federal government and the Northern industry stand up and take definite action, all the pious good wishes really don't make any sense." Moving on. Dorothy Zellner. Dorothy, or also known as Dottie Zellner, was asked when she first came into the SNCC office, "Can you type?" by then SNCC Executive Secretary Jim Foreman. And that's who's in this picture also, because you know that as women fight, there are a lot of women who were in this fight, but there are also men that were present in there and to really stand accounted for. Jim Foreman was a key strategist in the formation of SNCC. That was the first question that she was asked. She said yes, and she basically started to work with SNCC. And she said within a matter of months, even though she was afraid to walk 20 minutes into the SNCC office, and she was 22 years old at the time, she ultimately spent the next 22 years of her life working in the South. This picture here, if you look closely or if you can see it, she actually doesn't have shoes. And this is as a result of getting the high-powered, high-pressured water hoses turned on her at a protest. And Jim Foreman is collecting the information in an affidavit as a part of the process to record all of the various issues that were taking place at that time. Okay, we can move on to the next one. And Cynthia Washington. Cynthia Washington actually was born in Washington, D.C. She was the SNCC field secretary. She came through the Nonviolent Action Group, the same one that Muriel came through, also called NAG. And that had, NAG was a part of Howard University's SNCC affiliate. And it provided a significant core of Black volunteers to the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project. Cynthia was actually brought up in a society that was referred to as the DCBB, also known as the DC Black Bourgeois. And this was something that Cynthia was readily able to just leave behind, this elitist perspective, and devote her time and work to the people of the Mississippi Delta. She served in the Alabama Black Belt, and she directed a project in Greene County. She's also a project director in Boulevard County, Mississippi, one of the few places where women were placed. And a quote from her says, "I did not see what I was doing as exceptional. The community women I worked with on projects were respected and admired for their strength and endurance. They were typical rather than unusual." Cynthia Washington's consciousness of struggle extended beyond just the racial injustice, and she actually extended an arm in support to the National Farm Workers Association, who called on boycotts for various injustices that farm workers and the migrant communities were facing. So, and now we can move on, and we'll come back to Muriel. Muriel Tillinghast is a keynote speaker. These are the people that she was working with as a result of her time. And I wanted to just also point out that oh, bear with me, that Muriel currently works on a number of different things. She is working, sorry, one moment, ladies, I need to get back to my notes over here. She deals with alternative prison sentencing. She deals with medical advocacy, immigration, tenant rights and housing advocacy, and children's rights. She currently serves as a chairperson of the Ethical Action Committee at the Brooklyn Society for Ethical Culture. And Muriel, you're still with us?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. We're going to actually begin the process of asking questions now as it relates to our panel discussion. I just want to take a moment to note the quote that we have for you up here, which says, "The movement continues in every aspect of life. I have carried my understanding of its principles to the classroom, to work, to the prisons, and in my daily walk through life. It is as vital to me as the air I breathe." Now, given your knowledge, your experience, and your recollection, is it true that over the span of time from the 1960s until now, this current broad-based engagement we are seeing across the world on issues of systemic racism could be characterized as the largest, most serious shift in the conversation on social inequality and racial justice in current history?
In response to your question, I have several comments. First of all, the current situation is in a very different time slot. When we were functioning in the 60s, and certainly before that time, it was a very hostile environment. And the hostility came from the white community, and there was also concern in the Black community. So we were like a sore thumb. And our organizational basis was not as a result of social media contact, but organizations. So in terms of when you talk about how large something was, it depended on the organization. I will say this. When I was coming through my neighborhood a couple of weeks ago, I saw thousands of young people of all colors, and I was very pleased. It was the first time that I have seen a broad-based affirmation of Black interest in this country. And I thought maybe, just maybe, America is ready to turn a page.
What makes this, go ahead.
Well, I had some other things down here because, you know, Marcus Garvey, for example, had organized a huge Black operation that was subverted, and we don't have time to go into those details, but there were a number of thousands of people engaged in that. So that was Black people working on Black issues. Then there was, of course, the Pan-African movement that came out of the world wars, primarily pushed out of World War I and II, which had universal, I would say, appeal on the decolonization issue. So we have come down to the present day, and we're looking at what happened with the Wall Street organizing group. I can't think of the name of it now.
Occupy Wall Street?
Organize Wall Street, yes.
Occupy.
Which raised the issue of classism, for which Black people have obviously caught in the bottom of that morass as well. So in many ways, you can't compare the apples and the oranges. You know, we're at a different time, it's broader based, and the white community is waking up to understand that to continue to participate in things as they are usually is to continue with the oppression that Black people have now articulated very, very well. I also just wanted to say a word too, that, you know, people get pegged, and the civil rights movement was really much broader than what people think it was. And I just made some notes here that I thought people ought to be aware of. First, NAG worked with and supported the Black lung legislation, which had to do with coal mining issues, primarily out of West Virginia. So, and we shared office space with coal miners. Now, we also had people who were engaged in disabilities issue. And Ann Wooten was my good friend out of NAG, who was part of the first White House Conference on Disabilities. We also worked on housing rights and helped to write some of the first tenant right laws in Washington, D.C., where prior to our effort, there were no pro-tenant laws on the book. Let's see, I am also looking at, I wanted to also indicate that NAG and SNCC welcomed everybody, gays, straight, Chicano, indigenous people, Asians, and we had representatives of all of those groups in our group. And of course, people were thinking about what was going on with the Black community, what was going on in their own communities. Right. So I like to think that the SNCC was a stimulus to various things that came out of the 60s. And I'll just name a few more. Women's rights came directly out of SNCC. The roles of government, okay, which we believe were an affirmation process. There was also the self-affirmation and self-identification of individuals. The use of the word Black with a capital B to note a national group as opposed to small b noting color, okay, and used as a pejorative for hundreds of years. All right, and so much, much more. So we were broadly looking at how to make American society better.
Very good. I'm going to just take another moment to ask you, how do you define racism?
Racism, I have written, is a system of control based on color and caste. I say that because there's really no such thing as race, but we don't have time for that discussion at this time. The point is that racism is a dynamic that is multifaceted and covers the entire society's operations and cultural processes, determining what is appropriate and inappropriate. It's legal, illegal, and extra-legal. It permeates all systems and governs all behaviors. It endeavors to permanently disadvantage one group against others to the advantage of the dominant group that is imbued with the sense of entitlement, whether it's in actuality or materially or in psychological cash payment.
Wow, okay. I'm going to leave it there for the moment, and I thank you for your responses. We're going to move on, Kanika, to your question.
Mm-hmm.
And what if we consider the person who may be asking themselves the following? I struggle with understanding racism. I am sure that I treat everyone equally and conduct myself as such at all times. I feel as if what I do is enough. What does a call to being an anti-racist ask me to do? How would you respond?
Yeah, okay, so this is a thing. I've been asked this question by many of my friends since everything unfolded in the States over the last several weeks. And it has taken a lot of energy for me myself to just also deal with where I'm standing with the situation as a Black woman, because that's what I am. Okay, some people are uncomfortable with me saying that, but that's exactly what I am. I fully engage in that. And that's my identity. And friends from the States, friends from Europe, everybody wanting to have this conversation. I'm already exhausted with it. So if I can take a few moments to share your feelings and misunderstandings or guilt or whatever it is, it takes time to do that. So please understand that at first when you want to approach your Black friends or people of color that are your friends, let them, we're grieving from this. So understand that to start. Secondly, you're saying I'm doing everything I can do. I'm treating everyone equally. I'm going to say this to you right now that maybe you don't see color, but you can make a correlation with the fact that if you don't see color, you probably don't see discrimination. So that is a line in the sand to begin with. But I want to tell you that if you're taking a step, or to take steps, or to take some kind of engage in this whole thing, that you're on the call. So that means you want to learn and you want to discover and you want to figure out what it is you didn't know, or you also want to have a voice. So you're already on this call. And for those of you who've asked questions, so like step 1 is, I'm on the call, I registered. Step 2 is, I've asked questions. And then we can go on down the road, which leads to you voting, which leads to you wanting change, which leads to you actually wanting to physically see something. And what I'm going to ask you to do, first of all, is think about, yes, you might be making posts on social media, forwarding posts and whatever. Somebody already did the work to formulate that post that you're forwarding anyway, okay? And that's not an actionable thing, in my opinion. I think what you need to do is do the work within yourself, within your person, educate yourself, get uncomfortable with the topics that you could avoid because you were in your castle and didn't have to deal with everything going on with other people. And do a deep dive for yourself. And it's important to have the conversations with your friends, with your family, over coffee, tea, wine, whatever. There are Black men in the United States who had to sit down with their Black sons and have conversations about the fact that this just happened and you're not safe. So for you to have a conversation with your children about what this means for the future of your children and the future of other people's children who may be brown skin or Black skin, let that go and get out there and educate yourself, have those conversations, make everybody important, and learn about what needs to be learned about. Systemic racism is a thing. It's real. It is real. It's 400 years of real. White privilege is real. It is 400 years and longer of real. And I'm not talking about affluence. I'm talking about accessibility and oppression is what I'm talking about. So these are the topics, these are the things to research when you want to educate yourself about what's going on. So that your understandings will begin to change, and so that because your understanding changes, the understanding of people around you is also going to change. And hopefully that will get to the point of influence. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you for that. I wanted to also invite the other panelists. Do you have any thoughts on this discussion? I mean, no one has a patent answer, but it is an exploration in terms of where we are and what we're doing. Any other thoughts from the panelists?
I do.
Hi, Emily.
Hi. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, obviously. And I think in terms of when I'm examining myself about why has this not affected me before, I did grow up in a very white community. I went to a public school full of very white children. I went to a university that was mostly white. I and my parents, I come from a family, my father, were definitely aspirational middle class. He grew up on a sustenance farm, poor as poor can be. He put himself through university, he put himself through law school, he worked as hard as anybody ever worked to move himself and his family up the ladder. And in our family, the idea, it was just education and hard work and everyone will get there. And it was always this formula, education, hard work, education, hard work. No one's gonna do it for you. And it was this idea that it was the same for everyone that I grew up with. And the fact is, it's not the same for everyone. And that's what I think that I was missing as a child growing up in a very white environment, is that I didn't see how much more hard or how much more difficult it was for other people growing up when you also factored in the race. So I think it's, even though I'm kind to everybody I meet, it's the idea that out in the world, I'm not thinking about all these other people and what their journey has been. And to recognize the existence of other journeys is something that began with the process of moving abroad, of marrying someone who wasn't American, of moving to other countries, of living in other environments. But it is something that I think when you experience as an American living someone else, a fish out of water, to also realize that within our own communities, we have others who have their own journeys that we haven't seen. And to see and to hear and to listen, I think is one of the biggest benefits I've gotten from the self-reflection that's come from this situation that's rising in the United States.
Thank you, Emily. Muriel, did you want to add anything?
Are you speaking to me?
Yes, would you like to add anything to this?
Well, I did have a response to the question that you raised, because where does individual behavior appreciate in the larger systemic issue? And I will simply say that when an individual treats others with dignity and respect, it is very much appreciated, but it is a tiny step. And I will say this, that we are trying to deal with a massive change, because individual work does not actually change the trajectory. And so what we are working on in some regard is getting white people to see what the negative effect is of racism on them. I mentioned before about psychological cash. When it gets this feeling good because they're white. There used to be an expression we used to hear, well, at least I'm not black. Well, okay, but look at the price you paid. The price you paid is you've been cheated out of clean air. You have been, environmental degradation is occurring. What you assume is a good education is only at best a partial education. And so you have a misunderstanding of where you are in the world. And I would say most people of white orientation really do see the world as their oyster. They don't realize they're Johnny-come-latelys to the world scene. Black people, brown people, you call them yellow people, red people, all these other people have been on these land spaces for thousands of years. In the United States, the Native American community has been here for over 10,000 years. The idea that they no longer have anything to say about the space that, in fact, they protected, they treated Mother Earth very differently than the European societies, raises some questions that maybe we ought to rethink about what we're doing and how we're doing, and maybe we don't have all the answers. And I'm speaking of that as a Westerner. Okay, well, the other things I was going to say, no, think I'm going to let it go with that. Thank you.
No, really appreciate it, ladies. And I'm going to move on to the third question, actually, on the panel, which is, oh, excuse me. I'm actually going to stop talking and and truly co-host with my lovely co-host, Kanika. Please take over.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent. Well, thank you, Muriel, for your comments as well, because I think it certainly, it's opening all our minds to things that we're not thinking about, that there's so much, the layers are so deep, and the time is so vast as well. So thank you for that. I wanted to pose a question, or a few questions, over to Emily.
Okay.
Thank you. So historically, looking from a historical perspective, and a lot of women on the call are, were members of FAWCO, presidents in some ways, and engaged in FAWCO responsibilities over the years. What has been the role of FAWCO in engaging in social advocacy?
Well, that's a very interesting question for an organization that's coming on 90 years old. We were founded in 1931. The issue of the day at that time was about citizenship, particularly in the context of Americans married to non-Americans, because they lost their citizenship when they married a non-American. Then there was something called the Cable Act, which changed things, but only a little bit. So you could maintain your citizenship as long as you married someone who was eligible for American citizenship. And at that time, if you were Asian, you would never be eligible for American citizenship. So there's already some racial context to what's going on in the citizenship questions. But FAWCO was very involved in working to change those laws, not only for American women married to foreigners, but also to the foreign wives of American men, and to the children born to American women and men abroad. So, and there was a lot of gender issues that really complicated how that was treated. But since then, issues that were related to America were always, that's part of our founding. So it's been citizenship, it's been voting, absentee voting from abroad. It's been whether or not Americans living overseas should be included in the census. All of those issues were very, very instrumental in our founding and have persisted throughout our 90 years of existence. But we didn't simply stop with those issues. We've always been involved. We were founded with the idea that women working together cooperatively could help to achieve world peace. So think about 1931 in Europe, our first conference in Berlin, and what was going on in Europe in those instances. And a lot of the women were very well educated. They were married to powerful people, and they wanted to make a difference. So they got together, they used their connections and their network to try to work toward peace. And one of the things that they were early involved with was disaster relief for lots of different countries. And fairly early on, they started to branch out to other concepts within the world. So Peace Through Knowledge was a committee that was instigated in 1965 within FAWCO. And this whole concept of, we had speakers that talked on racial issues. We had a speaker, race relations, and the next decade, progress or confusion. And that was a topic of a FAWCO conference in 1965. I wasn't able to look at the report of that speaker, but the idea was that FAWCO women were very used to being a fish out of water, to being the odd man out, to facing a sort of discrimination, not the same kind that we speak of when we talk about racial discrimination, but from the not one of us kind of discriminations living in all these different countries. So the people that were in Germany are the Americans in Germany, and the people in London, the people in The Hague, the people in the Vienna, they were all experiencing the same difficulties, but in a different context. And so by coming together, they were able to share a lot of these difficulties. And that's something that FAWCO really worked to do, is help their members come to terms with being the other, and finding ways to settle, to find their place in the world when they're not where they grew up, where they're not where everybody knows who they are, where they're not amongst people who assume the best of them.
Mm-hmm.
So in the 70s, things started to really broaden up with FAWCO. So we created a new category of membership called the affiliate clubs. So these were clubs that weren't predominantly American. They had a substantial portion of other nationalities. And the idea that this experience of being a fish out of water, out of being the other, is one that was shared by people of other nationalities who were also the other. And so by bringing in these other experiences, it helped to sort of change the nature of our organization, so that by the time we got to the 90s, we were really ready for a global focus. And that's when we started applying as an NGO with the United Nations and requesting our ECOSOC status, which allow us not only to call ourselves an NGO, but allow us to speak at the United Nations, to have a voice globally. And with our status, that allowed us to go to Beijing to the 4th conference on women. And it really spearheaded this idea that FAWCO also needed to be focusing on the global issues of the biggest importance. And then, so with our relationship with the United Nations, we turned towards the issues that we defined for ourselves. You know, there's so many things that we could talk about in the United Nations. What do we want to talk about? Well, that's been divided into focusing on primarily women and children, gender issues, education, environment, health, human rights. And within those, they all have their own branches of global interests that people are involved with. So FAWCO historically has followed the passions of its members and has followed the times in terms of what's of interest to our members. And our members in this case are clubs and organizations. So they come to us with things that you see bubbling up over time. Can it be violence against women? Is it going to be human trafficking? Is it going to be peace through knowledge? And those are the issues, but we've never addressed them in terms of race. So there's never been that issue. There's always been this idea of FAWCO as a multiculturally accepting organization, but we've never really put a racial lens on it. So that's kind of the history of FAWCO and how we've been involved. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you for that. But yeah, I think it makes sense, you know, that the fish in the water example makes a lot of sense. And that there's women who also traditionally over time as a gender have been oppressed and put in a box. But when you add race on top of that, it becomes so much more vast, and that there needs to be a focus if you're going to be, because in every one of those avenues that you discuss, there is a race overlay in all of it.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's where which brings me to the next question, because I've also got these questions coming in from the other presidents as well. But, and I'm going to put it into two, I'm going to just make it one question altogether.
Okay.
Which I know you're already exploring this and working toward it, but if you can speak in your own words about this. So the questions are, what is envisioned to take place during your administration that will help facilitate change both, internally in the organization and externally, but in that, what types of projects and activities are being considered?
Okay, so I don't have a endless amount of time, so this is going to be a fairly brief recap. So with the instances of what was going on with George Floyd and the protests that arose around it, FAWCO wanted to make a statement, because obviously this is something that no one in FAWCO likes to see, and the frustration was enormous. And when we were talking about making a statement, there was some pushback, because the pushback was, how can FAWCO make a statement when you have 90 years of white boards? When you have pictures of your conferences and they are predominantly white? And why does FAWCO think that they have any status at all to speak to these issues in the context of human rights or in the context of anything? And that's a pretty harsh statement to hear as the president of an organization that wants to do good in the world. But, you know, with that hurt and that history comes the need to examine, wait a minute, where is this coming from? And you know, is there something that we're missing? And there is something that we've been missing. So the immediate aftermath of that, that particular conversation was to try to engage on an individual level. And I, as president, reached out to several people that I knew had things to say, who'd had experiences and who had commentary and wanted to talk. And with that, it was my job to listen and to hear and to try to figure out, okay, how are we going to move forward with this? Racism isn't history. It's not over. We haven't solved it. And just by being people who are respectful and kind in our daily lives, we're not going to move forward. We're not going to have a representative body of members or potential members if we don't make some effort to understand why we don't have more already. Because nothing changes if nothing changes. So through these conversations, and I've had about a dozen of them so far, I did go as well to the presidents and reps joint meeting and tell them that this had started, and for people to contact me if they would like to have a conversation and be part of the conversation. So I did have quite a few people contact me. I've been having conversations for the last couple of weeks. And we've been talking about concepts of diversity and inclusion, equity, anti-discrimination. And then outside of that, related, but still sort of a little bit aside, is the larger concept of racial justice and social justice. So what has come out of these initial conversations is the first movement is that we are going to task a group, a task force, that specifically is going to come up with a written policy. And there's a little bit of debate about whether or not a written policy means anything. What are words? And what do words mean to an organization? Well, in FAWCO's case, they actually have more impact than you might think. We have something called the resolutions and recommendations, which are re-examined every 2 years, and they talk about the issues that are of most importance to our members and our member clubs. And they deal with things, sometimes something like the Vienna Convention will come up, and we will really work for that for that time period. Sometimes it will be the Kyoto Protocol. Sometimes it will be the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Sometimes it will be the children's rights. And it always involves our involvement, our growing involvement with the United Nations, our continuing connection to American citizenship rights, our connection with our clubs in terms of helping clubs be organizations, to share our network and our knowledge with them. But they clearly, the moment right now is the one that needs to deal with this lack of representation in our organization. We do have Black leaders within FAWCO. We have Black presidents. We have Black reps. We have a Black presidents coordinator. But is our organization truly representative? And I don't know that that is true. And what I'm hearing from people as well is that a lot of women, particularly at club level, will go to their first meeting and look around the room and say, there's nothing here for me. These women don't want me here. And that hurts to hear, but that is in fact what is happening. So with this idea of a task force, we want to put into words these aspirations, these ideals of a more inclusive organization and a more inclusive society. Because FAWCO, it changes its board every 2 years. In the clubs change their boards every year or every 2 years. It is important to put it down, to have something that we can present to our membership and then our membership can stand behind and vote for, in terms of whenever anyone looks at FAWCO, is this the kind of organization I want to get involved with? I'm a person that likes women's rights. I'm a person that likes or doesn't like human trafficking. I'm a person who likes all these things. You know, I'm a person who wants to be inclusive, who wants to have an organization that is truly open to anyone who wants to do what we're all doing. We can have that in writing, and then people will see it as a sort of guiding principle. And it does affect the way they behave at local levels when they're having interactions with individuals. So we want to have the written policy prepared, and we want to identify actions and concrete mechanisms that we can then share with the clubs and model to the clubs on how that can also help open their own membership, perhaps to a segment of global citizens who otherwise would want to be joining in what we're doing in our philanthropy and our work at the United Nations, in our connections with the United States and our information about taxes and citizenship. So that's what's happening with the ad hoc committee. We'll be making those appointments, and the work that will be done from March. From September until March. So there will be conversations amongst the committee, and they will be sort of have flexibility to structure that, but also with the idea that they will reach out to the membership in general to get suggestions and ideas and input. Now, in addition to that, it's just sort of on a local or in a sort of a more immediate way in response to the world reaction to what is happening in the United States. It was triggered with the murder of George Floyd, but also with all of the other activists, the lynchings, the deaths, the unfairness, the injustice. And so we were able to organize this panel with our lovely guest speaker, Muriel Tillinghast, with such a rich experience of what happened in the movement in the 60s up until today. But we also, within our clubs, they're also organizing events. We had one on Monday about diversity and inclusion, and we had several of the other clubs are organizing different kinds of discussions and panels, and mostly virtual events right now. And then finally, in terms of programming, what we can do, well, one of the things is we can be open to it. We can say, if you're willing to do something, bring it to us. And what we do try to do within FAWCO, we're a framework. We allow a lot of people with different passions to pursue their passion for the environment or their passion for education. We take turns with the Target Project in terms of education, environment, health, and human rights. Right now we're on health. But within the context of what our mission is, and within the context of what the recommendations and resolutions that have been approved by our membership, then we have a lot of room for programming. And with judging from the response to this session, I think the time is right. People are listening. So let's just take the bull by the horns and deal with it. So.
Okay. That is really good answer, covering a lot of things. I think a lot of people on the call wanted to hear from you and wanted to hear what the direction was and what the intention is, and that you're open to what's next. Just an anecdote from me is just that I'm happy to hear that. And including in that, I think should be, if you have aspirations, they should be big. You know, it's the go big or go home thing for me, you know, in terms of that. And in that, it means that also, if you set guidelines and you set programs and things that are available to the clubs to use and plug into and get a little help on the side or however it is what they're doing. That there is an external evaluation of that and the impact of it. That the guidelines you set in place, the programs you set in place are evaluated that the impact actually works. Because words are just words, but if everything you set up can be evaluated that it has worked and it is effective, then it really, really is. So that's just a side opinion coming out of my.
I think that's something that the task force indeed will be tasked with looking at, is indeed coming up with deliverables, coming up with the ways to evaluate, giving us an idea of what success might look like. So yes, I think that's something that we are willing to go forward with. You know, one of the things that was remarkable to me and having the conversations that I've been having these last couple of weeks is that everybody's willing. Everybody wants to go there. Everybody. There's no one saying, no, I'm not interested. Everyone's like, let's do this. You know, why hasn't it happened already? Let's do it. So, you know, there's no organizational resistance. And in that sense, I think things have, you know, they're already positive for change, just in the sense that people are willing to change. And that's certainly what I've been hearing. I hope it's what others have been hearing as well.
Yeah, I think the response when we first posted this, I mean, we're 4 days in, 4 days, you know, and we had almost 100 registrations and 4 days, you know, and so for the people, it's recorded for the people who couldn't attend for whatever conflicts they had, but it really just, it gives you the picture that yes, people are open to this. They want to learn, they want to grow, they want to do what they can. And that's the power also in FAWCO as well. So thank you, Emily, for your input.
Thank you.
And
thank you for talking, and thank you for organizing.
I wanted to let everyone know that we are at the 6:20 mark, which means that we still have a few questions. I have one more interim with the panel, and then we still have some questions coming from all of you, the audience, that we want to incorporate in this, but I just want to keep you mindful of the time so that if you have other things that you need to do, feel free, because we're recording this. But we're going to do our best to address some of the questions as a panel and get everyone involved. So with that, I'd like to lean over to Bayo with a question about the title of the presentation, which is The Anti-Racist Global Citizen, which is a powerful title in and of itself. So what is this? What is it? What is the anti-racist global citizen? And what are your thoughts on what characterizes an anti-racist global citizen?
I appreciate the question, and you know, there's no set definition. We won't find this in the Oxford Dictionary or any other reference point at this point. However, there are some pieces, and I'll pick up on the characterization, if you will, of what a global citizen is. I mean, my reference point for global citizen, by the way, comes from the introduction, and I hope that my memory is really serving me well here. And I'm blanking on his name, but he was an incredible opera singer, and I believe he had been asked at one point in time, you know, to what country did he belong? And he said, it's an African-American opera singer, and I'm just blanking right now, but the point of the matter is his response was that I was a global citizen. I'm a citizen of the world. And, you know, so don't ask me for a passport for one place. I belong everywhere. And this idea of that, I mean, look at us, you know, we are international women, right? Now or in the past, Our vision is not just on our block or where we were born. Our lives and our paths have taken us so many different places. And so we do look at the globe in a way that is, it's just another point, right, on the map, as opposed to something that's just so far away and so distant, it's outside of your world. Everything is a part of our world. And so the global citizen is a person who's a member and understands and sees that. And you'll see on my slide when I'm talking about some of the characteristics as it relates to being an anti-racist. I mean, it's one thing to say that you're not racist, right? You know, you just kind of, you don't engage. But of course, people, and you're hearing this push that you're not engaging is not enough, right? There has to be some active, proactive thing that you do. For example, when you see injustice, do you just wink it by, something you don't see, take another bite of your sandwich, or do you get outraged? You know, are you incensed by this? Some people, and you can see it sometimes in children, I teach children and I teach adults, but you know, sometimes when something's just fundamentally wrong, there's no way that I could keep silent on this issue because it's just wrong. So this outrage of social justice, this idea that knowing yourself and knowing your sphere of influence, what's around you, what resources do you have right now that's available to you that you can offer and lend? I'm thinking about, there's an actress, Ellen Pompeo, who actually was on a movie. This was several months ago, and everybody's talking about gender equity in terms of pay. However, there was a Black woman, I believe it was Octavia Spencer, who was getting offered a significantly less amount to play a character in this film. And Ellen Pompeo said to the decision makers, match her salary with mine or I walk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this kind of thing that was readily in her sphere of influence. She could command that. And she saw an inequity and she spoke to it. It's this kind of thing of looking around with what you know that you have and being aware of yourself and saying, how can I lend a hand?
Mm-hmm.
Building awareness in the wider world, because the world in one way, yes, we can travel it, and at some point we can really travel it, y'all, again. But in this wider world, sometimes there are places that are just off the map, right? Those are no-go places. I know someone who went to Brazil during the World Cup, and I was like, well, are you going to visit a favela to see how the people live? You know, I have no interest in that, was the response, huh? You wanted the good parts. And so it's part of this discomfort and getting not comfortable. We shouldn't be comfortable with discomfort, but we recognize it, because if you think it's uncomfortable to talk about, how about what the person has to live through,
Mm-hmm.
right? So being aware of your wider world, and moving past passivity, moving past just, oh yeah, well anyway, you know, when someone interrupts a conversation and you're on, focus, and someone interrupts and they may be saying something that's important, but it's not in your scope. It's not important to you, and it's dismissed, right? Or it's just conveniently ignored. Not just giving passive consideration. You see someone laying down, oh, well, that's an unfortunate event, but I'm gonna keep on going to Target. Instead, actively engaging. And I know it feels funny because often we are encouraged not to get involved, right? You could get hurt, right? You could get involved in this. But actually that person that's laying down on the ground just may need someone as brave as you to step up and step in, because ain't nobody else doing it. Mm-hmm. Opening yourself up to the continued learning. We're learning today. What do we say on Instagram? I was today years old when I found something out, that we're always in this constant process of learning. And I think that we need to be open to it, right? We're never too old. We're never too, at any point in our life or station, to think that we can't be open and receptive to some new information. And looking at diverse perspectives, right? Doing this active listening. There's something that's a part of that. There's actually the undercurrent in that is bringing with your wisdom and with your knowledge, a level of humility. You say that there's space for more to know. And then it actually comes back to even what we were talking about the evaluation of proposed programs that come up. It's about accountability and the personal accountability, right? And we talk about sometimes looking in the mirror. Can you look yourself in the mirror? Some people are like, I'm totally okay. Even though I stepped over those people at Target who are on the ground, I needed to get my things and I'm good. But actually, if we're doing some self-reflection, we know that there's a level of accountability and self-respect that we don't have when we haven't done the right thing. And it's okay, but you have to look at that ugly part of yourself and say, you know what, this needs to shift. And the next time that I see something that's not right, I don't turn away. I say something, I do something. So that's part of these pieces, I think, that are component parts that characterize the anti-racist in this global citizenship, you know. And I will go to the next slide as it relates to the steps of walking a path of anti-racist and inclusive practice. You know, these are just, again, there's no guidebook, right? I mean, even if you, in the earlier slide, it says it was inspired by life, right? Our life experiences kind of shape us, but sometimes we need some reshaping. So it's about reflecting, you know, the thought process of reflecting and challenging what you currently know. How do you know what you know is actually true?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's something else that you need to know. People have struggled, and I know when, you know, politically, when the political climates changed, there was a challenge even at the dinner table, right? Because no longer what grandmother told you were some people ready to still accept. No longer was the mythology that Uncle whoever shared with you about the family history, and then you got to learn some other things, and that was starting to counter. So this ability to reflect and to challenge, to tussle with that worldview, to expand, to think. And doing that work, it's not just a self-reflection, but actually actively going out and searching and trying to find some other resources. So then not only that, but now we're talking about what you say and to be open about it, right? Not like, oh, that's a terrible thing that happened over there as you clutch your pearls and speak into the corner, or apologize to that person in the corner of the party when they have been publicly humiliated or there was an effort to do such. But you take that person to the side, I'm really sorry to hear that, instead of saying, hey, why did you disrespect that person? What are you doing? Mm-hmm. Right then and there. And again, as you say, as I identify here, humility is key. Being able to mark what you know and then knowing what you don't know and saying, now this is my point of learning. I think that's key. And then taking the action forward, taking informed action. Yes, you see someone, some action that's happening, but you know, the first thing, and you may not go diving straight into the water. You may want to ask what happened. But if you do that with an openness and a readiness to say, I'm ready to be of service, to support. You have that courage and you have that kindness. What a wonderful combination when we engage passively, from the shopping mall to a catastrophic event, to leave people better off for having passed and crossed that path. I think that is a key part of walking the path of anti-racist and inclusive. Mm-hmm. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that, Bayo. And yeah, like you said some really key things there. Yeah, does any other panel members want to comment about that? Because it's like you did a deeper dive into dealing with yourself and how you approach everything with humility, which is reflected in having courage. I had said something earlier about, you know, you stow away in your castle and you don't have to deal with the things that are right in front of you. Well, it is right in front of you every single day. You have to say something. But if you come from a place of love and you come from a place of kindness, then eventually it's not going to be so much work. It's going to be part of who you are.
Hey.
So, Emily or Muriel, do you have comments based on Bayo's, what she shared with us?
Oh, I think what she's saying is indeed very very key. The idea of listening and of speaking up, and it's difficult because in the context of speaking up, you also open yourself up to oh, you're sharing the memes, you're showing your outrage, but what are you doing? So within the speaking up, it has to be the living the life behind it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Muriel?
Well, my only comment was going to be, because these are closing statements at this point, that your organization has begun developing a pathway to open this more broadly for discussion and work. I want to encourage you to do so. I want people to start reading and learning, because it is when you are prepared, you are not thrown off base by your expectations, which may be false or maybe too extraordinary to be achieved immediately. But you keep on working on this, and you need to be supportive of each other, and that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we can move on now to the audience participation part of the program. So we hope that you all got your fingers ready to do some chatting with us. But yeah, what I will do, so first of all, we're going to go through the 3 questions that we posed to you all in the registration. And then after we've addressed the 3 questions, we will have an open reflection. And in that open reflection, I am going to include some of the questions that came over from people who had registered earlier on. So we'll get started. I'm just going to share with you the first question, which you hopefully will recognize from your registration, which is question number 1. What ideas and activities could you engage in to address anti-racist practice within your organization? So that's within your club, or if you're joining us from an outside organization, if you can just take a moment and ponder that, or if you came prepared with a question, if you can now include that in the chat. And if Anne-Marie can ensure that the chat is available for everyone to make a comment. And from there, we can read a few of the ideas that some people may have that you've actually had some time to think about to address within your own clubs, your own organization, directly related to anti-racist practice. And the chat is open now. Now, if nobody has any ideas, they're waiting for us, then okay. But,
Crickets, I hear.
It's a hard question. Like the American Women's Club in Stockholm, which I'm a member of, it's hard to get anybody to join, get people involved. So it's a hard question just from that standpoint. Sweden has had, just as you were talking before, African-American women have come to the club and looked at it and said, oh, this isn't for me, because they've disappeared. It's changed. I mean, I've been in Sweden for 50 years, and I've looked at the population of Sweden and the change of it from people coming from other countries and being integrated into different aspects of society. Mm-hmm. But I do specifically remember that we had a number of African-American women who came, looked at the club, and thought, this is not for me. I didn't think it was for me. I grew up worrying about white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. I was discriminated against because I was of Italian descent. And when I first joined the club, I thought, oh, I won't fit in here. And if somebody like me, who is white, if people wanted to admit it around the 1920s, that's how I felt. And I think the whiteness of women's clubs is one of the things that drives African-American women away. because they think I won't fit in here.
Mm. Yes, that is, someone had written into me who also had some other comments as well, that there is this Legally Blonde in reference to the film with the Legally Blonde, persona or what have you, which is I mean, it's, you cannot speak to someone else's experience, but it's a real experience that others are having. And even though you may not feel that way yourself, but as you're just sharing with us, you did feel you didn't fit in, just as a woman. So there are some concepts or preconceived personas and identities about philanthropic women's clubs.
Women's clubs have been traditionally so, especially where I come from, New Jersey, a town with a very wealthy upper class and a very big working class. And that's the way it was.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Even in California, you know, I'm from there, and I was in some of those Sweaters and Pearls organizations, and I grew up in societies like that. And maybe it just became easier for me to figure out my own, how do I move through with as little noise as possible to be part of this, because philanthropy was also a big thing for my family. So I wanted to be part of these clubs. No, other people didn't look like me. The people who looked like me were actually my mom's friends, which is also a weird age gap, you know, but this is the thing. But I thank you so much, Carol, for your input. Really appreciate it. I just want to address some of the comments that came in here in the chat. Some people who, thank you all for, who are submitting in our chat here. And we have sharing anti-racism resources, anti-racism book club facilitated by a trained professional. That's an actionable thing. We could definitely organize a similar panel discussion as we had today. So we could have book panel discussions. This does not need to stop here in this conversation. This can keep going, you guys. You know, let's keep the momentum going and take every avenue we need to go to address everything, or as much as we can.
I'll say as well that Laurie Richardson has hosted a book discussion group, which she tried to keep to 8 members. And so she ended up having the book discussion group twice, with the idea that it's difficult to have real discussions in very large groups. But I know the conversations were ongoing from that, and Laurie is in the process of arranging a follow-up for the people who were interested in that. But there is indeed, especially now that everyone is so comfortable with the virtual meeting rooms, there's no reason indeed why we couldn't have more. FAWCO also has something called a club workshops program, where people in our organization have offered to do different things, or FAWCO has offered to find people to host a session for clubs. And that's definitely something that we can do as well, is that we can provide people, panels, experts, and connect them with clubs who are wanting to do things more on a local level. And especially with these virtual opportunities now.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Thank you very much, because then we can have more exposure on this for sure, and deal with different time zones and everything else. I want to thank you, Emily. I want to continue on with some of the side chat here. I am interested in doing a program called Rewiring Your Racial Consciousness. We have movies that deal with racial issues along with discussions following the movies. That's great, especially dealing with historical aspects and having a visual of the impact that some of the systematic things that have been in place can educate people about. We have, there needs to be measurable accountability in the end, absolutely. Discussion guides would be very valuable. We have a comment that I still encounter people that don't understand why the Black Lives Matter movement is so important. Along with Tanya's ideas of movies, book studies, books about race and anti-racism. So see, there's just a huge Yeah, people, your minds are spinning, and I love this. Let's see, some long-term members who tend to scare new people away of all races. It seems like many people younger of other races as well don't see AWC Gothenburg as relevant. We could organize a similar panel. Yes, we had that. A chicken or an egg problem. That's interesting. If Black women come to clubs and don't see people who like them, they may not feel like staying. Okay. Having a person of color, Black, Hispanic, Asian in leadership positions will encourage more participation from the Black community. It's still about the experience, I think, of the person who, if I'm president and you're still entering Legally Blonde, you may not identify with me. So I think it's about how you identify with having different types of people within an organization representing all different, as much as you can.
I echo that Kanika, in terms of really, I mean, just because you see doesn't necessarily mean that there's still a fit. And actually, even if you were the only, there has to be a first. And it's about how do you feel, how comfortable and how invited you feel in that. And I am familiar, even sometimes people don't even know, but they're putting out a vibe that really is, well, it's a repellent of sorts. And I think in part we have to, and by the way, Black people and Black women are not a monolith. They come in a variety of stripes and come at this. So it's not like, oh, well, I need to do it like this way in order. No, absolutely not. And maybe if we're open to experimentation, we begin to experiment on how that works, because it's not a one size fits all, but actually us adapting a bit will actually help us be more adaptable to, generally speaking.
Totally agree. A lot of you have contributed. We can do something about getting out the words and everybody who has provided input into this so everyone can see. Some of these are really great, actionable comments. So I do want to get to that, but we do have 2 more questions to get through. So don't worry, your comments are not lost at all. Everyone will still be able to see these comments, but we want to get to the other 2 questions. So please don't not input on the other questions. Okay, so we're going to get to, okay. Thank you, Tonya. I see Tonya.
Yes, I see Tonya too.
Everybody in there, so I'm really excited about everybody's enthusiasm. See, this is the meat of the stuff. This is the good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to quickly share my screen with y'all again for question number 2. Number 2.
And yes. So how will you structure your membership outreach to facilitate inclusive practice? This is an invitation, and I mean, just like we're spinning about the other idea for people to put into the chat, what are you thinking about, right? I mean, membership is key here. How do you change that avenue for inclusion? What do you think you can do to begin to tweak it? It doesn't have to be a refined thought, but it's something to begin to put down on paper. And so we invite you to put it in the chat.
Thank you. Okay, well, Roseanne had mentioned newcomers, trying to welcome new members. Yeah, and that's what we're looking at. Evaluate where you're marketing the club and who you're marketing to. That's key, yeah.
There's a question from Sue that she's concerned about how associate organizations can implement this, with the idea being that there might be a difference between clubs that are not predominantly American. But really on this issue, it's not an American problem, it's a global problem. And all of our organizations, even the ones that have a lot of nationalities, might not be as representative of the type of membership that they could have. So associate clubs or international clubs should also be able to use some of these suggestions and tools to attract a more diverse membership.
Yes, and in that social media, Diana's written here, how are you portraying your club on the platforms? Okay, so if you have a multicultural appearance, or, you know, if you are posting on social media, perhaps standing behind events that are going to take place that are about people of color or something else, that could get some attention. But in perhaps a collaboration with an international club in those other societies, if they're interested in that, I mean, there's work that has to be done. Obviously, you can't just say, let's link our social medias together and do this. There's a responsibility for you to protect not only your own membership, but, you know, anyone else. And so being strategic about how you promote your club's activities and what your club supports, that you're not just only showing, you know, Elle Woods and her Legally Blonde girls, you know, walking down the street looking like that, but you've got more of a diverse perspective, where women of all nations or women of all colors can feel like they can be part of this and part of your platforms and have a voice. So you should really be mindful about that. This comment, I think it's natural to gravitate towards those like us at meetings. Yes, of course. Whether by age or working from home, kids, absolutely. And even race, then we can be active in recognizing that and going up to someone new and just have that welcoming conversation. So is that an activity that you present to your membership or your welcoming committee, that they follow up with people once they've been to a meeting, that people make sure that they have had a touch point with the person, a new member coming into a meeting? You know, hi, I am da-da-da, I'm from wherever. Sometimes it's just about engagement and feeling that you belong because someone is talking to you. So, yes, why are all the Black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? That's a good one. That's really good, yes. So, expanding your perspective about being inclusive.
And even when your population currently isn't inclusive, just because that person isn't in the room, how about everybody else still getting educated about someone who's not in the room? I mean, that's part of the awareness as well. So yes, otherwise there's that line, right? That you essentially are reinforcing the bubble if you don't bother to look over and to begin to learn or allow for those other viewpoints, even if that person isn't necessarily there in the room and for consideration. It's just in response to some of these other people, but in response to the time, I think we better move up.
Yeah, I apologize, but everyone will get these points. I see Mary and Tanya are bringing some real actionable things you can do, things you can watch, things you can educate yourself. So you'll get that information. We're just going to go to the last question, number 3. And that is for me. What type of assistance and support would your organization need to implement these actions? Perhaps support from FAWCO, which Emily has been explaining a path there. Can you think of any other assistance offhand that you would appreciate? FAWCO offered workshops that came in. Tanya and has a lot of and discussion guides for people as well. Task force, collaborate on tasks. Task forces between clubs. Between clubs is amazing, especially if
collaboration is great.
You're in the same country. Hello, you know. Yeah, voting is huge. That's definitely an actual impact. I think people need to understand the layers about voting and why that is important. And it's not just to keep things the same and the way they are. It's about having an impact and making change. And that's through voting as well. Does anyone else have comments on question 3? Shareable content between clubs. Continuing the conversation. A lot of these boards are looking for ideas and strategies. So I think it's very clear that some real, thank you, Rhonda.
I think Tanya is suggesting that she is also one of the people willing to do workshops. So we can definitely get that on our schedule.
Right.
And others. We have a member in the Hamburg Club that's also pursuing a possibility of doing some, she's a therapist. So doing some kind of support group through FAWCO. I'm not sure if that's going to develop into fruition, but if she's willing, it will happen.
Yes. Yeah, all of that, everybody included.
Right? Yes and yes and yes.
Because it is not going to be, this is not the effort of 2 or 3 people. This is the effort of, you know, a movement within. So getting behind that. And yeah, we've got 7 minutes left, and I wanted to open up to the audience. So I just want you all to know that this has been recorded. Again, this has been recorded. So those of you who maybe it's only you and your board members are part of this call, this is for you to share also with your membership. And please be open to sharing this with your members, because just because you think they may not be interested, you could be wrong about that. They may be actually interested in understanding this, knowing about it, and being part of this. So
to some of the people that have made some comments, their resources will be made available on the FAWCO website. There will be a link to this recorded recorded session available from the FAWCO website. Look in FAWCO News. It will also be posted on Facebook. The idea that we have not just a central hub in terms of resources on the FAWCO website, but perhaps a discussion group, that's something that we can also create another Facebook group if that's where people would like to have these conversations. The task force that's coming up is also going to be a place that's going to identify some of the areas where we need to work on. Yeah, by raising your hand, by sending an email to me for right now, but to the task force shortly, you can get involved and participate more in these conversations.
We also have an email, don't we, that also will serve kind of as a link for, as we're closing out, but Kanika, you can take that away if you like. I mean, that's when it'll come up in our last slide.
Yeah.
Just because there may be several ways, but we're working
Yeah.
together. This is the beginning, everyone. Right?
Absolutely. I'll move to your last 2 closing slides, Bayo, just because we're right at the end.
Yes.
You know, we clearly need to have another one of these for the other questions, because there are some really cool ones in here. Maybe we show the closing information, and if anyone can stay on, I can address those questions. But up to the panelists, if they still want to stay on, and if that's even possible. But if you want to do the...
Sure. No, and I mean, really, just as it says, today was just the first step. And so we are inviting you, and, you know, we have in one way, the time is now. And even when you're sitting and maybe taking a little bit of rest, you can be reflecting and thinking. We want to hit this in a number of different ways, and we want to take this passion and the commitment and really make it into something. I think it's important for a lot of people here that it's substantive. It's not just putting words on paper and a feel-good session. We're way past that. So what does this look like? Let's talk, and let's keep talking. You can just go to the last slide. And so this was the email that we were referring to, or in terms of other thoughts that may come, that may surface even after this session that you want to reflect on. Pop an email. We're gathering it, organizing it, working with it, synthesizing it, and we'll be responsive to it. And we look forward to having you on this journey with us. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I want to thank each and every one of the panelists that were on today. Everyone was absolutely fantabulous. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience in the beginning. You know, if it's crunchy in the beginning, you know it's going to be great in the end, right? Because it's like real people behind it. So thank you so much for hanging in there with us. Really a special thank you and gratitude for not only your service to this country, and speaking on behalf of people who have been voiceless, Muriel Tillinghast. Thank you so much for joining us today. I thought what you offered was just incredible. So thank you. Emily,
Thank you.
yeah, I appreciate it so much, you getting behind this and sharing and bonding and making this connection, both from the club perspective as well as the FAWCO. We've been together, but let's make this bond even more solid, even more concrete. And Kanika, you've been just fabulous, both as a sounding board and just as a source of energy and inspiration. And I just can't thank you enough. I just really appreciate it. And for everyone who's here and everybody who's hung in there, it's just the beginning. We continue. The struggle continues.
Thank you, Bayo.
you.
Thank you, Kanika.
Right.
And thank you, Muriel. We really appreciate all the effort you went to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you
Bye-bye.
all who attended.
Thank you.
For listening.
I don't know if people are getting off the call. I have no idea what's happening. I can't see anything anymore.
I think you have to stay and keep a frozen smile, you know, to the end.
Okay. All the teeth. It was an honor, Muriel. Thank you so much for being here with us today and spending your time and sharing everything, all of your knowledge, all of your experience with us. It was truly a blessing, and we're just very thankful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Emily, as well. And thank you, Bayo, for the structure of it. Thank you so much. Brilliant.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.